Welcome back everyone for another video of Virtual Warfare, a text-based roleplay fighting tutorial series. Hi, I'm Karen, the AI of Virtual Warfare, and I will be your host for this video. We will continue reviewing the secret errors of roleplay fighting. So, without further ado, let's begin. The concept of speed. Mach 1, top exertion. In the previous video, it was said that stating the measurement of speed is sometimes meaningless. Because without the notation of time and effort, which is based on the method of real-time roleplay fighting, it will always have an inconsistent nature when trying to implement it into the system. Here's why. Say the top speed of a rule set is Mach 1. Since the top speed for both fighters is literally the same, no fighter will be able to outrun or outpunch another, because both fighters would have the same ability to reach Mach 1. This means, it doesn't matter if the top speed was Mach 1 or light speed, both fighters would still have the ability to reach the same speed. This makes the idea of documenting speed ambiguous and without meaning. Thus, the implementation of speed can only be used to build an illustration of how fast a particular object is moving compared to another, not essentially make one faster than the opponent. Because, any attempt used to outrun an opponent would be impossible. Unless the opponent themselves performed an action at a lower speed, say 200 miles per hour, then it will always be impossible to use the notations of top speed to outdo another who has the same potential. However, with this brings up another concern that many roleplay fighters are simply not aware of, which is receiving and experiencing the effects of inertia or drawbacks when performing high-powered attacks. When performing fully exerted attacks, like a haymaker, the practitioner suffers from drawbacks, e.g., a longer recovery time. Because the top speed is, say, Mach 1 again, anyone attempting to reach the magnitude of that top speed would be using all of their effort to do it, like performing a haymaker. This is because Mach 1 would be the top speed, and in order to reach that speed, one must virtually exert all their top effort to reach that top speed. And because many are unaware of the implications of exertion, when top speeds are performed, they become negligent to the effects of inertia that occurs when one's might is fully exerted. This causes fighters to become unaware to the procedures of recovery time. And because of this, punches and kicks would be done left and right at top speeds, and no implications of inertia, recovery time, even fatigue, will ever be documented. This corrupts the system. On the contrary, this reveals the inconsistencies of using the documentation of speed without the implications of exertion. Because if one is moving at top speed, without abiding by the laws of exertion and inertia, which determines the duration of one's recovery time, they will virtually be moving in an inauthentic way, which would result in a god mode or another invalidation. This is why virtual warfare is very adamant about the laws of exertion. Without the measurements of time, space and exertion, measurements like speed, force, weight, distance, volume, etc., cannot be authentically documented. Therefore, it cannot be used to enforce or provoke any rules that says, speed needs to be stated, in an attempt to disqualify you. Because, without the notation of effort, exertion, any implications of speed will always turn out flawed and inconsistent. This denotes that the idea of using speed to be almost meaningless, as it can only be used to build a better picture of how fast an object is going compared to another. Creating your own type of energy. This is also my favorite because it emphasizes on the aspect of creativity in roleplay fighting. Roleplay fighting is not only supposed to be realistic, it's supposed to be creative as well. However, many fighters take advantage of this concept of being creative, and abuse the power of doing so. One of the areas that this concept is utilized in is creating your own energy. Here, the practitioner is allowed to use their imagination to create any type of substance that they desire. Whether it is liquid, gas, solid or plasma, the practitioner is allowed to create their own substance with any physics of their choosing. One example of this is creating a substance that can only be affected by a substance of its own kind. This means, any actual, scientific substance cannot affect it but only the substance of its own kind. However, this type of use of physics creates many inconsistencies. Because, if a substance that is created can only be affected by itself, how then can it abide by any type of law of physics without contradicting itself? The laws of physics must have an effect on it if it is able to exist within the physical universe, to exist and have a function without becoming chaotic, or more literally, non-existent. This creates a paradox within the system, thus becoming invalid when trying to implement this form of the idea into roleplay fighting. A clearer example is creating an energy that can only be destroyed by an energy of its own kind. This creates a paradox within the system. Because, if I have an energy that cannot be destroyed, except by the means of its own kind, that also mean that its counterpart exists. This means that the other party can create an energy that can destroy anything, except the means of its own kind. This creates a paradox. Because, if one can destroy any substance except its own, and the other cannot be destroyed except by a substance of its own, whose energy will come out on top, the scientific explanation of the result would be inconceivable, therefore, a paradox would enter the system and corrupt it. This is also known as the irresistible force paradox. See link in the description below. The only way to legitimize this concept is by implementing the measurements of time and effort into the system. This means, the vessel producing this type of substance must reciprocate the same level of magnitude in order to sustain it. In other words, the practitioner must also share the same irresistibility attributes that the substance share. This allows the attributes of irresistibility within the substance to be subjected to change without damaging the quality of its nature. And the only way to implement this concept is by adding the measurements of time and effort. This means, until a certain duration of time expires, the substance would sustain the nature of being irresistible. However, the only possible way for these measurements to be added is by connecting an object that is subjected to the notations of time and effort with the production of the energy. Because, the omnipotence used to maintain the irresistibility attribute must be equal to it. And the only element within existence closest to this omnipotent attribute, because it is believed to be eternal, is the soul of a human. Thus, in order to render this godlike substance, one must have the godlike potential to manipulate it. And the only way of doing this is by sacrificing a godlike substance closest to it, which is the soul. This is where the implementations of time and energy are essential, not just for this particular concept, but for the entirety of roleplay fighting. Because, now, the irresistibility attribute is able to lose its power, which can only be maintained on a particular level, or frequency, that the character must focus to maintain. If the character cannot maintain the focus or concentration for the substance, then the nature of the power is lost. And if a character focuses or concentrates for too long to maintain the nature of the power, they themselves will become drained, thus, ultimately making the substance lose its power. Therefore, it no longer becomes a paradox and either substance could outdo the other. However, there is still one major flaw. If the energy that can't be destroyed clashes with the energy that can destroy anything, even for a split second in time, the implications of the results would be incomprehensible, thus impossible to document with an accurate notation. This makes the concept and the results of the irresistibility concept purely based on a hypothesis. In other words, everything would be made up, and both ideas would figuratively be clashing against each other, literally illustrating the irresistible force paradox within it. The only way to successfully and legitimately utilize the idea of creating your own substance, or energy, is by simply following the fundamental principles of particle physics. This makes the created substance subjected to change. Therefore, it can be affected by any substance besides its own, while also sharing the created structure that it is made from. In example, a semi-solid that has the same particles of water, that you can eat instead of drink, but if sat out in the sun, can expand and grow, and in the cold, shrink and become tiny, can be created. This means, even though it doesn't behave like any other known substance, it becomes a hypothetical substance, utilizing the aspect of creativity for roleplay fighting. However, since fundamental forces, like gravity and electromagnetic energy, can manipulate it, it can sustain an existing state within the universe and carry out its function through the laws of physics. Thus, allowing the idea and the created substance to fit evenly within the system without contradicting the system are the laws of physics. The concept of transformations. When it comes to using the concept of transforming, within a rule set that limits a character's speed, strength, power, etc., this concept can only be used to enhance the way a character executes their moves and abilities, not make them stronger and faster. Obviously, this is because the rule set restricts a fighter from initiating any performances above the designated limit. As transformations usually enhances the overall performance of a character, in, say, MP, you cannot use a transformation to become faster, or stronger, than the stated limitations. This makes the idea of implementing the concept of transformations, to virtually enhance a character, meaningless. Because, in order to use the concept, one must first create a character in a limited base form. Thus, when transforming, they will be able to output the maximum capacity of their potential. Whereas, in a base form, the character wouldn't be able to reach Mach 1, unless they transformed first. This makes the concept applicable only for the aesthetics of a character or roleplay. Because, to say that, in order for someone to reach Mach 1, they have to first transform, is subjecting a person on how they should create their character. This is unfair and unethical and can only be enforced within certain communities that would abide by this concept, not to be a universal law, e.g., God mode. And if this type of law or rule set is not written within the guidelines of the community, it cannot be enforced to invalidate a character or roleplay. The only way to utilize the concept of transformations is by applying it to the concept of implementing the idea of time and exertion into the system. In other words, the idea can only be used to allow a character to reach, say, Mach 1, faster than they normally could. In example, in a base form it would take them 2 seconds to reach Mach 1, but in their transformation, it would only take them a half of second. This allows the concept of transformation to be used without limiting a character or breaking the limit of a rule set. However, there is still one flaw. Some rule sets limit the character's ability to accelerate faster than the designated limit. Therefore, now that an input and output of energy has been regulated, there is virtually no need, nor room for the concept of transformations. It would, and could only be used for aesthetics. Thus, this makes the concept of transformation void when attempting to implement it into the system for an advantage over an opponent, but only if the input and output for a character is regulated by a particular rule set.